Dramatic rescue. Dog's head trapped in woven basket. Look who came to the rescue. It's heartbreaking to imagine being trapped, unable to see, breathe freely, or even call for help. But for one helpless dog, this nightmare became a terrifying reality. No one knew how long it had been stuck, wandering blindly with a woven basket tightly wrapped around its head. People passed by, some pausing for a moment before walking away. No one stopped. No one helped. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a stranger appeared. A man whose small act of kindness would change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the empty streets as a stray dog, thin and exhausted, searched desperately for food. Days, maybe weeks, had passed since it had last eaten a full meal. Hunger gnawed at its stomach, but the search never ended. Amidst the scattered trash, a woven basket caught the dog's attention. Maybe there was food inside? With hope, the dog pushed its head through the opening, sniffing for something, anything to eat. But the moment it tried to pull back, panic set in. The basket wouldn't budge. The dog jerked its head, pawed at the woven strands, twisting and turning, but the rough material only dug deeper. Thrashed wildly, sending dirt flying, but nothing worked. The more it fought, the tighter it seemed to get. Blind and terrified, the dog staggered through the streets, bumping into walls and stumbling over debris. Whimpers of fear escaped its throat, but no one stopped to help. People saw, some even pointed, but they kept walking. Breathless and exhausted, the dog collapsed on the side of the road. The world around it blurred, sounds faded. The fight was slipping away. And then footsteps approached. The sound of soft footsteps echoed on the empty street, drawing closer to the exhausted dog. It lay curled up on the pavement, its body barely moving. The basket around its head was more than just a physical trap. It was a symbol of how abandoned it truly was. People had walked by all day, some stopping for a second, some whispering to each other, but no one had done anything. And now, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, it seemed like the world had forgotten about this struggling creature. But not everyone had. A man stood a few feet away, watching carefully. He wasn't in a hurry, nor did he glance at the dog with the same fleeting pity that others had. Instead, he observed, taking in the sight of the trembling, helpless animal before stepping forward. His movements were slow, cautious, as if he didn't want to scare the poor thing any more than it already was. He knelt beside it and let out a soft sigh. His hands hovered over the basket, eyes narrowing as he examined just how tightly it was stuck. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The man wasn't someone special, at least not in the way the world defines heroes. He wasn't a vet, a rescuer, or someone who had dedicated his life to saving animals. He was just a regular person, walking home from work, when he had noticed the dog. Something about it made him stop. Maybe it was the way it lay there, too tired to even struggle anymore. Maybe it was the way it let out a small, defeated whimper every time someone passed it by. Or maybe, deep down, he just couldn't stand the thought of walking away like everyone else had. He spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. "Hey there, buddy. I see you. I'm here to help." His voice was gentle, but the dog still flinched at the sound. It had been ignored for so long that kindness felt strange, almost foreign. The man let it sniff his hand, waiting patiently for it to relax before slowly reaching out to touch the basket. He could feel the rough material pressing into the dog's fur, restricting its movements, making it harder for it to breathe properly. The dog shivered under his touch, but it didn't growl or try to run. It was too weak to resist anymore. The man took a deep breath and tried to pull the basket off gently. The dog let out a distressed whine, its body tensing up. He tried again, maneuvering the woven strands, hoping to loosen them without causing pain. But the basket wouldn't budge. It had somehow twisted in a way that made it nearly impossible to remove without force. And force was exactly what he didn't want to use. His fingers brushed against the dog's fur, feeling the spots where the basket had started digging in. He realized that if he kept trying to pull it off here, in the middle of the street, he might end up hurting the dog even more. He could try to cut it open, but without proper tools, one wrong move could injure the poor animal. It was too risky. He let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing the back of his neck as he glanced around. There was no one to ask for help. No one even seemed to care. Looking down at the dog, he made a decision. "All right, buddy. We can't fix this here. Looks like you're coming with me." He carefully scooped the weak animal into his arms. At first, the dog stiffened, its body going rigid. It was used to being on its own, to being ignored. The sudden warmth of human arms felt unfamiliar. But as exhaustion took over, its body slowly relaxed, letting itself be carried. The man started walking, holding the trembling dog close to his chest. The streetlights flickered on, casting a dim glow over them. With each step, he knew he was about to change this dog's life. What he didn't realize was that the dog was about to change his, too. The man knew he couldn't free the dog here on the street. The basket was too tight, and without the right tools, he could accidentally hurt the poor animal. He needed a safe space where he could take his time and be careful. Looking down at the weak, trembling dog, he made his decision. He bent down slowly, speaking in a soft, reassuring voice. "It's okay, buddy. I got you." He slid his arms under the dog's frail body and carefully lifted it. At first, the dog tensed up, its body stiff with fear. It had been alone for so long that human touch felt strange. But as the man held it close to his chest, keeping it warm against the cold night air, the dog's breathing steadied. It wasn't fighting to escape. It was simply too tired to resist. The man adjusted his grip, making sure the dog was comfortable before taking his first step toward home. Each step felt significant, as if he was carrying more than just a wounded animal. He was carrying a life that had been abandoned by the world. The streets were quiet, the distant hum of traffic the only sound breaking the silence. As the man walked, he could feel the slow, weak breaths of the dog against his chest. It was barely moving, its body limp from exhaustion. He held it securely, making sure it didn't jostle too much. A few people on the street noticed him carrying the dog. Some glanced at him with curiosity, others didn't seem to care. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting this dog to safety. Halfway home, the dog let out a soft whimper, shifting slightly in his arms. The man paused for a moment, gently stroking its back. "You're okay," he whispered. "We're almost there." The dog didn't understand his words, but it understood kindness. No one had ever stopped for it before, no one had ever held it this way. And in that moment, despite its pain, the dog felt something it hadn't in a long time: hope. The man finally reached his house and pushed the door open with his shoulder. As soon as he stepped inside, warmth surrounded them, replacing the cold night air. The familiar scent of home filled his lungs. Old books, fresh bread, and the faint smell of the two puppies already living there. The sound of tiny paws pattering against the floor echoed through the house. Two small puppies rushed toward him, their tails wagging in excitement. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity as they noticed the new visitor in their owner's arms. They sniffed the air, trying to understand who this strange dog was. The man smiled down at them. "Give our friend some space, okay?" The puppies tilted their heads but listened, stepping back as he carefully lowered the injured dog onto a soft blanket in the corner of the room. The dog curled up instantly, too weak to move much. Its breathing was still unsteady, and its body shivered slightly. The man quickly grabbed another blanket and draped it over the exhausted animal, hoping to give it some comfort. The puppies inched closer again, this time more gently. They sniffed the dog's fur, their tails wagging in a slower, more curious rhythm. One of them let out a soft, friendly bark, as if to say, "You're safe now." The man knelt beside the dog, his eyes locked onto the basket still stuck around its head. Now, in the warmth of his home, with the right tools and no rush, he could finally begin the real rescue. He took a deep breath, steadying his hands. This wasn't just about removing a basket. It was about giving this dog a second chance at life. He was determined not to fail. The man knelt beside the exhausted dog, his eyes fixed on the tightly woven basket that had trapped its head. Now that they were inside his home, with warmth and safety surrounding them, He could focus entirely on the delicate task ahead. The dog had barely moved since he placed it on the soft blanket, its body too weak from exhaustion and hunger. He reached out a gentle hand, stroking the dog's head lightly to reassure it. "It's okay, buddy. I won't hurt you," he murmured, his voice calm and steady. The dog's ears flicked slightly at the sound, but it made no attempt to resist. It was as if it had finally accepted that it was in safe hands. The man examined the basket closely. It was made of thick, woven fibers, likely discarded trash that the poor creature had somehow gotten stuck in. The more he looked, the more he realized how difficult this was going to be. The weave was tight, and the basket had molded around the dog's head in a way that left almost no space to work with. He knew one thing for sure: he couldn't rush this. One wrong move, and he could accidentally cut the dog's skin or worsen its injuries. This required patience, precision, and most of all, a steady hand. The man reached for a pair of small scissors from his drawer. A knife would be too risky; one slip and it could graze the dog's skin. He needed something with more control. He started by gently lifting the edge of the woven material, trying to find the loosest part. His fingers worked carefully, testing the fibers. The dog let out a soft whimper, shifting slightly. But the man paused and whispered reassuring words to keep it calm. Bit by bit, he began snipping through the tight weave. The first cut was the easiest, but as he moved further, the material seemed to tighten around the dog's head. He had to be extra cautious. Every time he applied slight pressure, he checked the dog's reaction, making sure he wasn't causing any discomfort. The two puppies sat nearby, watching with wide, curious eyes. They seemed to sense the tension in the air, their usual playful energy replaced by quiet anticipation. One of them took a few steps closer, sniffing the trapped dog, before sitting back down obediently. Almost there, the man whispered, more to himself than to the dog. His hands remained steady, but he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. This wasn't just about removing a basket. It was about freeing a helpless creature that had already suffered enough. Time passed slowly, each movement feeling more crucial than the last. Sweat formed on the man's brow as he continued snipping away at the thick fibers. He was making progress, but the process was painfully slow. At one point, the dog let out a sudden, sharp whimper. The man's heart lurched. Had he cut too close? Had he heard it? He immediately stopped, placing a gentle hand on the dog's back. "Shoo, you're okay. Promise," he soothed. He gave the dog a moment to relax before continuing. With each snip, the woven material loosened, but it still wasn't enough. The basket had been so tightly secured that it felt like an impossible puzzle. One wrong move, and he could make things worse. His fingers were beginning to ache from gripping the small scissors, but he refused to stop. The puppies, sensing his frustration, let out soft whimpers. One of them nudged his leg, as if offering comfort. He smiled faintly. I know. Just a little more," he muttered, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Then, finally, he found the last stubborn section of the weave, the part that was keeping the entire basket locked in place. He positioned the scissors carefully, making sure they were angled away from the dog's skin. He took a deep breath and snipped. The moment the last strand was cut, the basket loosened. Carefully, with slow and precise movements, the man slid it off the dog's head. For a brief moment, there was silence. The dog blinked, its eyes adjusting to the sudden freedom. It lifted its head slightly, sniffing the air as if testing whether this was real. The man let out a long sigh of relief, his body finally relaxing. "You're free now," he said softly, a smile spreading across his face. The two puppies, sensing the change, rushed forward with excitement. Their tiny tails wagged furiously as they sniffed the newly freed dog, their joy clear in their body language. One of them playfully licked its face, while the other barked softly, as if celebrating the success. The dog, still weak, barely reacted at first. It was as if it didn't know what to do with this sudden freedom. It had spent so long trapped that being able to move its head again felt foreign. But then, slowly, something changed. The dog lifted its nose and sniffed the air deeply. Its dull eyes, once filled with fear and exhaustion, showed a flicker of recognition. It turned its head toward the man, staring at him for a long moment. Then, in the smallest, most subtle gesture of gratitude, the dog nudged its nose against the man's hand. It was weak, barely noticeable, but it was there. The man felt a lump in his throat. He reached for a bowl of food he had prepared earlier and placed it in front of the dog. At first, the dog hesitated, its body stiff as if unsure whether it was allowed to eat. Then, hunger took over, and it lowered its head, taking its first real meal in what must have been days. The man watched as the dog ate, his heart swelling with warmth. The two puppies joined in, eating alongside their new companion, tails wagging happily. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything. This wasn't just about rescuing a dog. It was about giving a lost soul a home, a family, and a second chance at life. As the newly freed dog devoured its first real meal in what must have been days, the man sat back, watching with a deep sense of relief. The once trapped creature, whose fate had seemed so uncertain just hours ago, was finally safe. The soft glow of the lamp cast warm shadows around the small home, making the atmosphere feel even more comforting. The dog, though still weak, ate with a newfound determination. It was as if every bite was restoring a tiny piece of the strength it had lost. The man didn't rush it, letting the dog take its time. He knew that after everything it had been through, this was more than just a meal. It was the first step toward recovery. The food in the bowl was simple, soft, easy-to-digest pieces that wouldn't upset the dog's likely empty stomach. At first, the dog hesitated between bites, its instincts still on high alert. It kept lifting its head, looking around, as if expecting the basket to somehow return and trap it again. The man understood. Trauma didn't fade instantly. He made no sudden movements, allowing the dog to feel in control of its surroundings. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he knew the words meant little. Actions were what mattered. The two puppies, already full from their own dinner, sat nearby, tails wagging as they observed their new companion. They were clearly curious but also seemed to understand that the dog needed space. One of them took a few steps closer and let out a soft, friendly whimper. The dog froze, pausing mid-bite. Its tired eyes flicked toward the small pup, assessing it carefully. The puppy, unbothered, gave a little play bow before stepping back again, as if inviting the dog to join them when it was ready. The man smiled. Animals had a way of understanding things that words could never explain. As the dog finished eating, it slowly lowered itself onto the blanket, its body visibly more relaxed than before. It let out a deep sigh, one that carried exhaustion but also relief. The puppies took this as a sign that their new friend was settling in. With playful enthusiasm, one of them trotted closer and sniffed the dog's face. The other followed, gently nudging the older dog's paw with its tiny nose. At first, the dog didn't respond. It had likely spent so much time alone, frightened, starving, and trapped, that it had forgotten what kindness felt like. But as the puppies persisted, wagging their tails and letting out tiny, excited yips, something changed. The dog's ears perked ever so slightly. Its tail, once limp and lifeless, gave the smallest of twitches. Then, after a long pause, the dog lifted its head and nudged one of the puppies back. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but to the man it meant everything. The puppies yipped in excitement and pounced around playfully, as if celebrating this tiny victory. The dog watched them, its eyes softening, and for the first time since the rescue, it didn't look like a creature weighed down by suffering. The man couldn't help but smile. He had found this dog in the worst possible condition. Trapped, terrified, and hopeless. And now, here it was, slowly accepting kindness, slowly learning what it meant to be part of something again. Maybe this was just the beginning of its healing. Maybe it would take time for the scars, both seen and unseen, to fade. But one thing was certain. This dog was no longer alone. It had a home now, a family. And most of all, it had a second chance at life. As the night deepened, the man watched the once-trapped dog settle into its new home. The warmth of the room, the presence of the playful puppies, and the safety it now had. All of it felt like a world away from where the dog had been just hours ago. No longer confined by the cruel woven basket, no longer struggling for help in vain, it was finally free. The dog curled up on the soft blanket, its body still weak but its spirit slowly rekindling. The puppies had made it clear that they accepted their new friend, and now the dog was beginning to accept them too. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about belonging. The man had no doubts about it now. This dog wasn't just a temporary rescue. It was family. Looking at the scene before him, he realized he couldn't imagine sending the dog away. It had already found its place. The puppies had found a new companion, and the dog, despite its rough past, was already beginning to show signs of trust. He reached out, gently scratching behind the dog's ear. For the first time, the dog didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into the touch, closing its eyes as if savoring the simple act of kindness. This was more than just a rescue, it was the beginning of something beautiful. The man knew that the world was filled with animals just like this one, helpless, abandoned, and in desperate need of kindness. He hadn't planned on finding this dog, but fate had placed it in his path. And now, as he watched it rest peacefully, he couldn't help but wonder, how many other animals out there were still waiting for their own second chance? Sometimes all it took was one moment of compassion to change a life forever. As the camera fades out, let me ask you, if you ever came across an animal in need, would you stop to help? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with others. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, can make a difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible rescue stories. Your support helps spread awareness about the importance of kindness to animals. What would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've ever rescued an animal or witnessed an act of compassion, share your story below. Together, we can inspire more people to help those who can't ask for it themselves. Thank you for watching.